For decades, the relationship between the United States and India has been a rare bipartisan bright spot. But what if the entire foundation of that relationship just isn't enough for the challenges we're facing today? Okay, so let's dive into a really bold proposal from our recent Foreign Affairs article by Campbell and Sullivan. They're suggesting it's time for a radical upgrade, a formal US-India alliance.
And the authors, well, they don't mince words. They're warning of a rapid and regrettable downturn. For years, things were on this steady, upward path. But lately, friction over things like tariffs and Russia has kind of put the brakes on all that positive momentum. And that puts the whole relationship at risk.
And believe me, the stakes could not be higher. The big risk is that as tensions rise with Washington, we could end up pushing India closer to American adversaries. We're already seeing these high-profile meetings between the leaders of India, China, and Russia, and that's a pretty stark visual of a potential strategic shift.
So, how did this partnership, which we all thought was so carefully built, suddenly get so fragile? Well, to really get it, we need to look at the very structure of the relationship itself.
So think about it like this. U.S. foreign policy has basically always had two main boxes. You're either an ally, with a formal treaty and a mutual defense guarantee, think NATO, or you're a partner. And for all its importance, India has always been in that second, less formal category.
But here's the thing, this partnership model, it just isn't built for the world we live in today. It leaves the door open for all sorts of misunderstandings and missed opportunities, and it just lacks the deep structural ties you need for these really complex challenges. The argument is pretty clear. Just getting back to the old way of doing things, that's not going to cut it.
And that brings us right to the core of their proposal. It's time to move India into the alliance box. But, and this is the key part, we have to first completely redefine what an alliance even means in the 21st century.
And here's where their idea gets really interesting. A traditional military alliance is basically built on one simple promise. I'll defend you, you defend me. But what they're proposing is something totally different, a strategic alliance. And this one is based on concrete, mutual commitments in the areas that really define power today. We're talking technology, defense, and supply chains.
So what would this actually look like? Well, they're calling for a Senate-ratified treaty, and that is a huge deal. But it wouldn't be about a promise to go to war for each other. Instead, it'd be this detailed framework for deep integration across the most critical sectors of the economy and national security.
All right, so what would this new treaty actually do? The authors lay out a really clear blueprint that's built on 5 core pillars. Let's break them down.
So here they are. These are the 5 pillars that would form the foundation of this new alliance. And as you can see, it's a super comprehensive vision. It covers pretty much everything, from AI research and trade to joint defense production and even tackling climate change together.
Okay, let's break down the first 2. The whole idea here is to create a shared technology ecosystem so we can out-innovate competitors like China. Think about joint R&D on stuff like AI and biotech, making it way easier for scientists and engineers to work together. And of course, a new trade and investment agreement that's all about building resilient supply chains.
And when we talk about supply chains, you got to hear this number. It's kind of staggering. Right now, China supplies somewhere between 70 and 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the core components of medicines, to India's massive drug manufacturing industry.
And why should you care about that? Well, because a whopping 40% of the generic drugs we use right here in the US come from India. So what that means is our own healthcare system has this hidden dependency on China's supply chain. A new economic pact would be aimed at reducing exactly these kinds of shared vulnerabilities.
All right, now for defense and intelligence. Look, the goal here is to get way beyond just selling India American military hardware. It's about building new systems together, things like drones and air defense, and then operating them together. A really key piece of this would be creating a shared, real-time intelligence picture of the entire Indian Ocean, which is of course a critical global waterway.
And the last pillar? This is where the vision goes global. It proposes that the US and India should team up on projects in other countries. Just imagine it. US financing and know-how combined with India's development experience and its strong relationships in places like East Africa or the Pacific to tackle huge issues like climate change and food security.
Okay, so obviously a plan this big is going to have some major hurdles, right? The authors know this, and they actually tackle the biggest objections head on.
All right, first big question, and it's one a lot of people in Washington have. What about the reports of democratic backsliding and challenges to pluralism inside India? Can you really form a deeper alliance under these conditions?
So the author's take on this is pretty nuanced. They suggest having frank, private conversations, but also having a little bit of humility,
because, after all, the US is dealing with its own democratic challenges. Ultimately, they argue that engagement, not isolation, is the better path forward.
Okay, next up, the Russia problem. India has historically relied on Moscow for a lot of its military hardware and its energy. So how can it be a close US ally while keeping those ties?
The argument here is that India needs to make this choice for its own strategic good, not because Washington wants them to. Relying on Russian equipment is just becoming a liability. A formal US alliance would give them a clear, long-term alternative, and that would make it easier for New Delhi to finally make that shift.
And then, of course, you have to look at it from India's perspective. There's a huge question. For generations, India has really prized its strategic autonomy, its policy of not being formally aligned with any major power bloc. Wouldn't the treaty with the US just destroy that?
And really, this gets to the absolute heart of their whole argument. They're trying to challenge that old way of thinking. A modern alliance isn't about sacrificing your sovereignty or taking orders from someone else. It's about recognizing a deep alignment of interests and then building a structure to act on a common purpose.
So at the end of the day, we're left with a choice. We can either stick with the partnership model that's clearly showing its age and its limits, or we can take a leap towards something new and a whole lot more ambitious.
And that leaves us with this really powerful, kind of provocative final question. In a world with so many rising challenges, is the difficulty of building this new kind of alliance actually less dangerous than the risk of just letting this critical relationship drift apart? It's a choice that policymakers in both Washington and New Delhi are going to have to face.